The blood dripping between her fingers wasn't what scared Abigail Greene the most, it was the tiny life inside her that might never see daylight. She stumbled through the barren Arizona landscape, her dress torn and stained, her swollen belly a cruel reminder of all she had to live for. Behind her lay the abandoned mining camp where the Blackwater Gang had left her for dead. Ahead lay nothing but miles of desert and the fading light of a merciless summer day in 1878. Abigail collapsed against a boulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. 6 months pregnant and miles from civilization, she knew her chances were slim. The outlaws had taken everything her husband's life, their wagon, supplies, even her wedding ring. Thomas had died trying to protect her, shot down in the dust of the trail while she watched, helpless and horrified. The gang had dragged her to their camp, and when they tired of her, left her broken and bleeding in the wilderness. "Please," she whispered, one hand cradling her stomach. "Stay with me, little one." The sound of hoofbeats made her blood run cold. Had they returned to finish what they started? Abigail forced herself to her feet, searching desperately for a place to hide, but the sparse landscape offered little protection. The rider appeared over the ridge, a lone figure silhouetted against the setting sun. She pressed herself against the boulder, praying he would pass by without noticing her. But the horseman slowed, then stopped completely. Abigail held her breath as he dismounted and approached cautiously. "Madam, you all right?" The voice was deep but gentle, not one she recognized from the gang. Still, Abigail remained frozen, too terrified to respond. "I ain't gonna hurt you," the stranger said, stopping several paces away. "Name's Jake Sullivan. Got a ranch about 10 miles east of here." When she still didn't answer, he took a step closer, then froze when he saw her condition. His weathered face hardened as he took in her torn clothes and the bruises forming on her skin. "Good God!" he murmured, removing his hat. "Who did this to you?" Abigail opened her mouth to respond, but no sound emerged. Instead, her knees buckled beneath her, and she began to fall. In an instant, he was beside her, catching her before she hit the ground. "Easy now," he said, lowering her gently. "You're safe." "The baby," she managed to whisper. "Please, my baby." Jake's eyes widened as he noticed her swollen belly. With careful movements, he helped her sit against the boulder, then offered his canteen. "Drink," he urged. "Slow now." The water was cool and sweet against her parched throat. As strength returned to her limbs, so did the full horror of her situation. Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the dust and blood. "Blackwater Gang," she whispered. "They killed my husband. They. The words died in her throat. Jake's expression darkened with understanding and barely contained fury. The Blackwater Gang was notorious throughout the territory, ruthless outlaws who left few survivors. "They'll never touch you again," he said, his voice low and filled with iron certainty. "That's a promise." He whistled for his horse, a magnificent palomino that approached with obedient steps. "Can you ride? My ranch isn't far, and my housekeeper knows something about midwifery." Abigail nodded weakly. "I think so." With gentle hands, Jake helped her to her feet and assisted her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist, the other holding the reins. "Hold on, madam. We'll get you somewhere safe." As they rode east, Abigail leaned against the stranger's solid chest, too exhausted to maintain her fear. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the warm presence at her back lulled her into an uneasy half-sleep. For the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to believe she might survive. Jake's ranch appeared as the first streaks of dawn painted the sky. It was modest but well kept, a sturdy main house, a barn, corral, and bunkhouse. As they approached, A woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Jake Sullivan, where have you been all night?" "I was worried sick." The woman stopped short when she saw Abigail. "Lord have mercy. Clara, this lady needs help," Jake said as he dismounted. "She's in a bad way." Clara, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, rushed forward as Jake carefully lifted Abigail from the horse. "Blackwater Gang," he explained grimly. "Found her out near Eagle Pass. She's with child." Clara's face hardened with determination. "Bring her inside. Quick." The next few hours passed in a blur for Abigail. Clara bathed her wounds, gave her clean clothes, and examined her condition with gentle, practiced hands. To everyone's relief, the baby seemed unharmed, still kicking strongly despite the ordeal. "You're lucky," Clara told her, placing a cool cloth on Abigail's forehead. "Both of you are." When Abigail was settled in a clean bed with fresh linens, Jake entered the room, hat in hand. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Madam, I don't mean to pry, but I need to know, is there someone I should send word to? Family somewhere?" Abigail shook her head slowly. "No one. Thomas and I were heading to Pyramid City in Arizona Territory. He had a job waiting with the Silver Creek Mining Company." Her voice broke. "We were going to start a new life." Jake nodded, his blue eyes filled with compassion. "You rest now. You and your little one are welcome here as long as you need." For the next week, Abigail drifted between sleep and wakefulness, her body slowly healing from the trauma. Clara tended to her with motherly care, and Jake kept a respectful distance, checking on her progress through Clara each day. When she was finally strong enough to join them for meals, Abigail learned more about her rescuer. Jake Sullivan was 32, a former cavalry scout who had built his ranch from nothing after the war. He employed 2 ranch hands, Miguel, who had been with him since the beginning, and Hank, a younger man learning the trade. Clara had been his mother's friend and had stayed on after her passing 5 years ago. "This is mighty good of you," Abigail said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Taking in a stranger like this." Jake shrugged, his eyes on the horizon. "Any decent man would have done the same. Not many would offer their home indefinitely to a widow carrying another man's child." He looked at her then, his gaze direct and honest. "My father taught me that a man's worth is measured by how he treats those who can offer nothing in return." He smiled slightly. "Besides, Clara's been happier with another woman around. Gets tired of just us men, I reckon." As the weeks passed, Abigail's strength returned. She insisted on helping with household chores despite Clara's protests, needing to feel useful. She learned that Jake's ranch, while not the largest in the territory, was respected for its quality horses and cattle. Jake himself had a reputation as a fair man who kept to himself but would stand firm against any threat to what he considered his responsibility. One morning, as Abigail helped Clara with the laundry, the older woman paused in her work. "He's different with you here," she said thoughtfully. "What do you mean?" Clara smiled. "Jake's always been a good man but solitary. Since you came, he talks more. Even caught him humming yesterday." She eyed Abigail speculatively. "He rides into town every few days now, asking questions about that gang." Abigail's hands stilled. "He shouldn't. They're dangerous men. That boy was raised by a Texas Ranger. Justice runs in his blood." Clara placed a comforting hand on Abigail's arm. "He's careful, don't you worry." That evening, when Jake returned from checking the herd, Abigail was waiting on the porch. "Clara says you've been asking about the Blackwater Gang," she said without preamble. Jake removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Just keeping an ear to the ground." "Please don't," she said, her voice tight with fear. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. His expression softened. Nothing's going to happen to me, Abigail. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it hung in the air between them, intimate and charged with unspoken feelings. They're killers, she insisted. Thomas wasn't their first victim, and he won't be the last. Jake sat beside her on the porch step. The territorial marshal's been after them for months. All I'm doing is passing along information when I hear it. He hesitated. I did tell him about what happened to you and your husband. He may want to talk to you when you're stronger. Abigail wrapped her arms protectively around her growing belly. I'm not sure I can relive it. You don't have to decide now, Jake said gently. But your testimony could help bring them to justice. They sat in silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. What was he like? Jake asked suddenly. Your husband. The question caught her off guard, but Abigail found herself wanting to answer. Thomas was kind, a dreamer. He believed the West offered opportunity for anyone willing to work hard. She smiled sadly. He was so excited about becoming a father. Jake nodded, his profile strong against the twilight. Sounds like a good man. He was, she agreed, tears welling in her eyes. We were married just over a year. Without a word, Jake reached over and covered her hand with his. They sat that way until Clara called them in for supper, connected by the simple comfort of human touch. As her pregnancy progressed, Abigail found herself growing more comfortable at the Sullivan Ranch. The nightmares that had plagued her began to subside, replaced by a tentative hope for the future. She still mourned Thomas, still flinched at unexpected sounds, but she was healing both in body and spirit. Jake proved to be a thoughtful host, making sure she had everything she needed without making her feel like a burden. He brought back books from town when he learned she enjoyed reading, and built a rocking chair for her to use when the baby came. In the evenings, they often sat together on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing the peaceful silence. One afternoon in her 7th month, Abigail was sitting under the shade of a cottonwood tree near the house when she heard the sound of approaching riders. Fear gripped her heart until she recognized Jake among the 3 horsemen. The others were strangers, one wearing the badge of a U.S. Marshal, the other dressed in the simple black of a preacher. Clara came out to join her as the men dismounted and approached. "Afternoon, ladies," Jake said, removing his hat. "This is Marshal Robert Hayes and Reverend John Wilson from Pyramid City." The marshal stepped forward, a man in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Mrs. Greene, I'm sorry for your loss. Jake here has told me some of what happened, but I'd be grateful for any details you could provide about the Blackwater Gang." Abigail gripped the arms of her chair, but nodded. "I'll tell you what I can." Inside, at the kitchen table, Abigail recounted the terrible day, the ambush on the trail, Thomas's murder, her ordeal at the gang's camp. She described the men as best she could, including the distinctive scar on the leader's face and the gold tooth of his lieutenant. The marshal took notes, his expression grim. "That matches what we know of Silas Blackwood and his second-in-command, Ray Cooper. They've been terrorizing the territory for the better part of 2 years." He looked up at her. "Your testimony could be crucial in bringing them to justice, madam." "I'll do whatever is needed," Abigail said, her voice stronger than she expected. The Reverend, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Mrs. Greene, I understand you and your husband were bound for Pyramid City when this tragedy occurred. The mining company has held his position. Should you still wish to settle there after your child is born?" Abigail glanced at Jake, whose face remained carefully neutral. The thought of leaving the safety of the ranch filled her with anxiety, but she knew she couldn't impose on Jake's hospitality forever. "Thank you, Reverend. That's very kind." After the men departed, promising to return when they had news of the gang. An uncomfortable silence fell between Abigail and Jake. That evening, she found him in the barn, brushing down his horse with long, methodical strokes. "Will you be leaving then?" he asked without turning, having sensed her presence. "Once the baby comes?" Abigail leaned against the stall door. "I don't know. Thomas had such dreams for us in Pyramid City." Jake nodded, his focus still on the horse. "It's a good town. Growing. Safe." "What would you do?" she asked softly. "If you were me?" He finally turned to face her, his expression troubled. "I can't answer that, Abigail. You need to do what's best for you and your child." "And what if I don't know what that is anymore?" Jake set down the brush and approached her, stopping just short of touching distance. "You have time to decide. No one's rushing you." But there was something in his eyes, a guarded hope, perhaps, or a carefully contained emotion that made her heart beat faster. Before she could respond, the baby kicked hard, making her gasp and press a hand to her side. Without thinking, Jake reached out, his hand hovering uncertainly. "May I?" Nodding, Abigail took his calloused hand and placed it against the spot where her child moved. Jake's eyes widened in wonder as he felt the strong kicks. "That's something," he whispered. His hand lingered even after the movement stopped, warm against her through the fabric of her dress. The intimate moment was broken by Clara calling from the house. Jake stepped back, his expression unreadable as he gestured for Abigail to precede him out of the barn. That night, lying in her bed, Abigail faced the truth she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Jake Sullivan. The realization brought both joy and guilt. Joy for the unexpected gift of these new feelings. Guilt for how quickly they had come after Thomas's death. Was it a betrayal to open her heart again so soon? Or would Thomas, who had loved life so fiercely, want her to find happiness? With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Abigail finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. She dreamed of Thomas, smiling and placing her hand in Jake's, before turning and walking into a brilliant light. The next morning, she awoke with a sense of peace. Whatever the future held, she would face it with courage for herself, for her unborn child, and for the memory of the man who had first taught her to love. As her 8th month began, the August heat bore down mercilessly on the ranch. Abigail moved more slowly now, her belly grown large, her back aching constantly. Clara fussed over her, insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day, while Jake made sure the house stayed as cool as possible, hanging wet sheets in the windows and bringing fresh water from the deep well. One scorching afternoon, as Abigail dozed in her room, she was startled awake by the sound of raised voices. Struggling to her feet, she made her way to the window and peered out. Jake stood in the yard, confronting a dust-covered rider whose horse appeared near collapse from exhaustion. "Rode all night to warn you," the man was saying, his voice carrying on the still air. "They know she's here, Sullivan. Blackwood's put a price on her head." Abigail's blood ran cold. Clutching the window frame for support, she strained to hear Jake's response. "How?" His voice was taut with controlled anger. "Talk in the saloons. Someone recognized your description when you were asking questions. Word got back to them. The rider, whom Abigail now recognized as Bill Turner from the neighboring ranch, spat in the dust. They're saying they don't leave witnesses, especially one carrying evidence of their crimes." Jake's posture was rigid. "How much time do we have?" "Hard to say. They were spotted near Tucson 3 days ago, moving north. Could be tomorrow, could be next week." "Does the marshal know?" Turner nodded. "Sent a rider to him before I came here, but he's tracking another gang near the border. Might not make it back in time." "I appreciate the warning, Bill." Jake extended his hand, which Turner shook firmly. "You're welcome to rest here before heading back." Thanks, but Sarah's expecting me. Just thought you should know what's coming. Turner mounted his exhausted horse. Be careful, Jake. These aren't men to trifle with. As Turner rode away, Jake stood motionless in the yard, his face a mask of grim determination. When he finally turned toward the house, his eyes met Abigail's at the window. In that moment, they both understood the danger that threatened the fragile peace they had found. Jake called a meeting that evening in the kitchen. Present were Abigail, Clara, Miguel, and Hank, all listening intently as Jake outlined what they knew. The Blackwater Gang has at least 6 members that we know of, he said, his voice steady. They're well armed and have no respect for human life. We should send for help, Clara suggested. The army post at Fort Whipple isn't that far. Jake shook his head. Even if they sent men, which isn't certain, they wouldn't arrive in time. No, we need to prepare to defend ourselves. Or I could leave, Abigail said quietly. All eyes turned to her. This is my problem. I won't risk your lives. Jake's expression hardened. That's not an option. You wouldn't make it 10 miles in your condition, and I gave my word you'd be safe here. He looked around at the others. No one's asking any of you to fight. If you want to leave, I understand. Miguel, a man of few words, simply shook his head. I stay, Patron. Me too, Hank said, though his young face betrayed his fear. Ain't running from no outlaws. Clara snorted. Don't be foolish, Jake Sullivan. Where would I go at my age? Besides, someone has to patch you up when this is over. Jake's features softened with gratitude. Thank you, all of you. He turned back to Abigail. We have rifles, shotguns, and plenty of ammunition. The house is solid adobe, good protection against bullets. We'll take shifts keeping watch. As the others discussed the defensive preparations, Abigail struggled with waves of guilt and fear. These good people were willing to risk everything for her, a woman who had appeared in their lives just months ago. And Jake. The thought of him facing Silas Blackwood because of her made her physically ill. Later, after the others had retired, Abigail found Jake cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table. You shouldn't have to do this, she said softly. He looked up, his blue eyes steady. I'm not doing anything I don't want to do. These men are killers, Jake. They murdered Thomas without hesitation. I'm no stranger to violence, Abigail. His voice was gentle but firm. I fought in the war, served as a scout against Apache raiders. I know what men are capable of. She sank into a chair across from him, one hand absently stroking her belly. I'm afraid, she admitted. That's natural. Jake set down the rifle and reached across the table, covering her hand with his. But fear doesn't have to control us. Sometimes it just reminds us what's worth fighting for. Their eyes met, and the unspoken feelings between them seemed to fill the room. Jake's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Really? He was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. When I found you that day, something changed in me. I'd been living half a life out here, just existing. Then suddenly there you were, broken but undefeated, carrying a new life inside you despite everything. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not a man given to fancy words, Abigail, but I know that you and that baby deserve a chance at happiness. And if that means standing against Blackwood and his men, then that's what I'll do. Tears filled her eyes. I don't want to lose you too. You won't, he promised, though they both knew it wasn't a promise he could guarantee. The next 3 days passed in tense preparation. Miguel reinforced the shutters while Hank dug firing positions behind the low stone wall surrounding the house. Jake moved the horses to a hidden box canyon a mile away, ensuring they wouldn't be lost if the ranch was attacked. Clara stockpiled food and water in the root cellar, which could serve as a last refuge if necessary. Abigail helped where she could, rolling bandages and preparing ammunition. Her pregnancy limited her activities, but she refused to remain idle while others worked to protect her. On the fourth day, as the sun climbed toward noon, Miguel spotted a dust cloud to the south riders approaching at a steady pace. Jake ordered everyone to their positions. Clara and Abigail were to remain in the house, with Clara armed with a shotgun to protect them if the men got past the outer defenses. "Remember what I showed you," Jake told Abigail, pressing a revolver into her hands. "Only if there's no other choice." She nodded, her throat too tight for words. As he turned to leave, she caught his arm. "Jake!" The words she wanted to say caught in her throat. He smiled gently. "I know," he said, leaning forward to press a brief, tender kiss to her forehead. "Me too." Then he was gone, moving swiftly to join Miguel and Hank at the wall. From the window, Abigail watched as 7 riders came into view, approaching with the confidence of men who expected little resistance. She recognized Silas Blackwood at their head, a tall man with a jagged scar across his left cheek and cold, dead eyes. Beside him rode Ray Cooper, his gold tooth gleaming in the sunlight as he surveyed the ranch. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the wall. Blackwood raised his hand in a mocking greeting. "Sullivan," he called, "I hear you're harboring something that belongs to us." Jake stood, his rifle held casually across his body. "There's nothing here that's yours, Blackwood." "That's where you're wrong," Blackwood replied, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "The woman. She saw things she wasn't meant to see. Lives when she should be dead." His smile was chilling. "Hand her over, and we'll leave your ranch standing." "Not going to happen," Jake called back. "Best you turn around and ride away while you still can." Blackwood laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. 3 men against 7? Those aren't odds I'd bet on. 4. Came a new voice, and Abigail gasped as Bill Turner emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. He must have returned, understanding the danger was greater than he'd initially thought. "And here comes 5 through 7, another voice called. 3 riders appeared on the ridge to the east, Marshal Hayes and 2 deputies, their badges catching the sunlight. Blackwood's expression darkened as he realized the trap closing around him. For a tense moment, Abigail feared he would order his men to attack anyway, preferring death to capture. But after a quick conference with Cooper, he raised his hands in apparent surrender. "Seems we're outnumbered, Marshal," he called. "We'll come peaceful." "Dismount slowly," Hayes ordered. "Weapons on the ground." What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. As the outlaws began to dismount, Cooper suddenly drew a hidden pistol and fired at the marshal. Chaos erupted as both sides opened fire. Abigail watched in horror as men on both sides fell, including one of the deputies and Hank, who crumpled with a cry of pain. Through the smoke and confusion, she saw Blackwood break away, spurring his horse toward the house. Jake shouted a warning, but was pinned down by gunfire from Cooper and another outlaw. Clara pushed Abigail away from the window. "The cellar now," she commanded, raising the shotgun. But before they could move, the front door splintered under the impact of Blackwood's boot. He stood in the doorway, blood streaming from a wound in his arm, his eyes wild with hatred. "There you are," he snarled, advancing on Abigail. "Thought you'd escaped me, didn't you?" Clara fired, but in her haste, the shot went wide. Blackwood knocked her aside with a vicious blow, sending the older woman crashing into the table. "Clara!" Abigail cried, backing away as Blackwood approached. Her hand closed around the revolver Jake had given her, hidden in the folds of her dress. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, woman," Blackwood said, drawing a wicked-looking knife. "I'm going to enjoy finishing what we started." Outside, the gunfire was dying down, but Abigail couldn't tell who had prevailed. She continued backing away, one hand protectively over her belly, the other gripping the revolver. "Please," she said, playing for time. "The baby is innocent." Blackwood's smile was cruel. "Should have thought of that before you and your husband crossed my path." As he lunged forward, Abigail drew the revolver and fired. The bullet caught him in the chest, staggering him. His eyes widened in shock, but he kept coming, raising the knife. Abigail fired again and again, until the hammer fell on an empty chamber and Blackwood finally collapsed at her feet. The silence that followed was absolute. Abigail stood frozen, the smoking gun still pointed at Blackwood's motionless form. Then came the sound of boots on the porch, and Jake burst through the door, his face streaked with dirt and blood. "Abigail!" he called, his eyes wild with fear. "I'm all right," she managed, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Clara's hurt." Jake knelt beside the older woman, checking her pulse with gentle fingers. "She's alive," he reported with relief. "Just knocked out." Marshal Hayes appeared in the doorway, his left arm hanging limp at his side. "Cooper and 4 others are dead," he said grimly. 2 surrendered. His eyes fell on Blackwood's body, then moved to the revolver in Abigail's hand. "Looks like you got the ringleader." Jake crossed to Abigail, carefully taking the gun from her trembling fingers. "It's over," he said softly, drawing her into his arms. "You're safe now, both of you." Something warm and wet trickled down her legs, and Abigail looked down in confusion. "Jake," she whispered, clutching his shirt. "The baby." Her water had broken. The stress of the confrontation had triggered labor, a full month before her due time. The next 12 hours were a blur of pain and fear. Clara, recovered from her concussion but sporting a spectacular bruise, took charge of the birthing room with Miguel's wife Maria, who had arrived with the other neighboring ranchers who came to help after the shooting. Jake paced outside, deaf to the marshal's attempts at conversation. Hank's wound had proven less serious than first thought. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, and the young man rested in the bunkhouse under Miguel's watchful eye. The 2 surviving members of the Blackwater Gang were securely bound in the barn, awaiting transport to the territorial prison. Inside the bedroom, Abigail fought for her child's life with the same determination she had shown against Blackwood. The labor was long and difficult, complicated by the early onset and her weakened condition. Several times, Clara's face betrayed her concern, but she never let Abigail see her worry. "Push, child," she urged as dawn approached. "Your little one is almost here." With a final, exhausted effort, Abigail felt her baby slide into the world. For one heart-stopping moment, there was silence. Then came the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, the angry, indignant wail of a newborn. "A boy," Clara announced, her voice thick with emotion. "A strong, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Abigail's face as Clara placed the tiny, red-faced infant in her arms. Despite his early arrival, he was perfect: 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a shock of dark hair like his father's. "Thomas," she whispered, stroking his cheek with a gentle finger. "Your papa would have been so proud." When the room was cleaned and Abigail had been made comfortable, Clara opened the door to admit Jake. He entered hesitantly, his hat in his hands, his eyes immediately drawn to the bundle in Abigail's arms. "Would you like to meet him?" she asked softly. Jake approached the bed, his expression a mixture of awe and tenderness as he gazed down at the infant. "He's magnificent," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've named him Thomas after his father," Abigail said. "Thomas Jacob Greene." Jake's eyes met hers, surprise and gratitude evident in their blue depths. "I thought, if you don't mind." "I'm honored," he said simply, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. Thomas's fingers curled reflexively around Jake's calloused index finger, holding with surprising strength. "He likes you?" Abigail smiled, her heart swelling with love for both the man and the child. Jake's gaze held hers, a question in his eyes. "Abigail, I know it's too soon, and I have no right to ask, but—" "Yes," she interrupted, knowing what he wanted to say. "When we're ready. When it's right." His smile was like the sunrise after the darkest night. "I can wait," he promised, "as long as it takes." Clara, who had been pretending not to listen from the corner, let out a satisfied humph before tactfully excusing herself. Left alone with Abigail and the baby, Jake pulled a chair to the bedside and settled in, prepared to watch over them through the day and into the night if necessary. As Thomas drifted to sleep in his mother's arms, Jake reached out to brush a strand of hair from Abigail's tired face. "Rest now," he murmured. "I'll be here when you wake." Secure in that promise, Abigail allowed herself to surrender to exhaustion, knowing that for the first time since the terrible day of the ambush, her future held more hope than fear. The days following Thomas's birth were filled with visitors. The marshal returned to formally take Abigail's statement before transporting the surviving outlaws to Prescott for trial. The Reverend from Pyramid City came bearing gifts from the townspeople who had heard of her ordeal and courage. Neighboring ranchers and their wives arrived with food and baby clothes, curious to meet the woman who had survived the Blackwater Gang and helped bring down the territory's most wanted outlaws. Through it all, Jake remained a steady presence, managing the ranch, fielding visitors, and spending quiet hours with Abigail and Thomas whenever possible. His feelings were evident in every gentle touch, every concerned glance, but true to his word, he made no demands on her heart. As summer gave way to fall, Abigail grew stronger. Thomas thrived, a happy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. By October, Abigail was well enough to join Jake for short rides around the ranch, Thomas securely wrapped and carried against her chest. On one such ride, they stopped at a promontory overlooking the valley. The cottonwoods along the creek blazed gold against the blue sky, and the distant mountains wore the first dusting of snow on their peaks. "Beautiful country," Jake commented, dismounting and helping Abigail down. "It is," she agreed, adjusting Thomas's wrap. The baby blinked up at her, his expression serious as he studied her face. Jake spread a blanket on the ground, and they sat together, watching the play of light and shadow across the landscape. After a comfortable silence, he turned to her. "The Reverend mentioned that the mining company is still holding that position for you in Pyramid City," he said carefully. "If you wanted to go." Abigail looked down at her son, then back to Jake. "Is that what you want? For us to leave?" "God, no," he answered immediately, his honesty plain on his face. "I want you to stay, both of you. But I need you to choose freely, not out of gratitude or obligation." She smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "I've had plenty of time to think about what I want, Jake Sullivan. I've known it for a while now." Hope brightened his eyes. "And what is that?" "A home, a family." She squeezed his hand. "A good man who keeps his promises." Jake's smile was radiant as he moved closer, one hand gently cradling her face. "I love you, Abigail Greene. You and Thomas both." "And we love you," she whispered as his lips met hers in a tender, unhurried kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they returned to the ranch, Jake surprised her by leading her not to the main house, but to a small rise beyond the cottonwood grove. There stood the frame of a new house, the foundation complete and the walls beginning to take shape. "What's this?" Abigail asked, dismounting with Thomas still secure against her. Jake looked almost shy as he gestured to the structure. "I thought, if you decided to stay, you might want a place of your own. Of our own someday." He hurried to add, "No pressure." It's yours regardless. Tears sprang to Abigail's eyes as she walked around the foundation. The house was modestly sized but well-designed, with large windows positioned to catch the morning sun and a wide porch that would offer shade in the afternoon heat. When did you start this? After Thomas was born, Jake admitted. Miguel and Hank have been helping when they can. Bill Turner and some of the other neighbors too. It's perfect, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jake stepped closer, taking her free hand in his. I want to do this right, Abigail. I know you're still healing, still grieving. I can wait to make things official between us. She looked up at him, this man who had saved not just her life, but her faith in humanity. I don't want to wait too long, she said softly. Thomas deserves a father who loves him, and I deserve a husband who makes me feel safe and cherished. Jake's smile was tender as he bent to kiss her again, his arms encircling both her and the baby. Whenever you're ready, just say the word. They were married by Reverend Wilson on Christmas Eve, in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Clara had decorated the house with pine boughs and candles, and the delicious aroma of a holiday feast filled the air. Thomas, now nearly 5 months old and growing stronger every day, watched the proceedings from Clara's arms, occasionally reaching for the Reverend's spectacles with curious fingers. Abigail wore a gown of deep blue that Jake had ordered from Tucson, with a wreath of winter berries in her hair. As she spoke her vows, she felt Thomas's presence with them not as a sorrowful ghost, but as a beloved memory who would always be part of her heart and their son's heritage. Jake's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love and protect her and Thomas for all the days of his life. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering of friends erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than even the hungry ranch hands could consume. As midnight approached, Jake drew Abigail away from the festivities and out onto the porch. Happy? He asked, his arms around her waist. More than I ever thought possible again, she answered truthfully, leaning into his embrace. You've given me back my life, Jake Sullivan. He shook his head, his eyes serious in the lantern light. You did that yourself, Abigail. Your strength, your courage, those are what saved you. I just had the good fortune to find you that day. She rose on tiptoes to kiss him, marveling at how right it felt to be in his arms. We found each other, she corrected. And we found a future neither of us expected. From inside came Clara's voice, calling that Thomas was fussing for his mother. Jake smiled, pressing one more kiss to Abigail's forehead before leading her back inside to their son. That night, after the guests had departed and Thomas was sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Jake carried his bride across the threshold of the main house. Though their new home was not yet complete, he had prepared a special wedding night room, with fresh linens, fragrant candles, and wildflowers preserved from summer that Clara had helped him arrange. It's beautiful, Abigail whispered, touched by his thoughtfulness. Jake's eyes never left her face. You're beautiful, he countered, his voice husky with emotion. With gentle reverence, he helped her remove the blue gown, his calloused fingers tracing patterns of devotion across her skin. For Abigail, their lovemaking was a revelation tender yet passionate, built on trust and genuine affection. Jake was patient and attentive, mindful of her inexperience with tenderness in physical love. When they lay together afterward, her head on his chest and his arms securely around her, Abigail felt truly at peace for the first time in longer than she could remember. I never thought I could feel this way again, she confessed, her fingers tracing the scar on his shoulder, a remnant of his cavalry days. After Thomas died, I thought that part of me died too. Jake pressed a kiss to her hair. The heart has a remarkable capacity to heal, he said softly, and to expand. Your love for Thomas doesn't diminish what we have. If anything, It makes it more precious because you know how fragile life can be. She raised her head to look at him, wondering how she had found a man with such wisdom beneath his quiet exterior. "When did you get so philosophical, cowboy?" His smile was both tender and mischievous. "Must be all those books you've been reading to me." Laughing softly, she settled back against him, content in the knowledge that their journey together was just beginning. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and the completion of their new home. Jake carried Abigail across yet another threshold, this time with Thomas, now 9 months old and attempting his first wobbly steps, crawling eagerly after them. The house was everything Abigail had hoped for, sunny and warm, with a kitchen large enough for teaching Thomas to bake when he was older, a study filled with books, and bedrooms waiting for the family they both hoped to expand in the years to come. Clara remained in the main house, insisting that at her age, she had no interest in listening to young folks at all hours. But she visited daily, spoiling Thomas shamelessly and offering Abigail advice on everything from gardening to managing a stubborn husband. As Thomas's first birthday approached, Jake received a letter from the territorial governor commending him and Abigail for their role in bringing down the Blackwater Gang. The remaining members had been tried and sentenced, effectively ending the gang's reign of terror across Arizona. "They want to give us a reward," Jake told Abigail as they sat on their porch one evening, watching Thomas chase fireflies in the yard. "Blood money, essentially." Abigail considered this, watching her son's delight in the simple pleasure of summer twilight. "What if we used it to help others? Other women who've been victims of violence, perhaps?" Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That seems fitting. Maybe a shelter in Pyramid City? The mining town is growing, but there aren't many resources for women in difficult situations. And so the Greene Sullivan Home for Women was established in Pyramid City, offering sanctuary and a fresh start for those who needed it most. Abigail visited whenever possible, sharing her story with women who had lost hope, showing by example that survival was possible, that joy could follow despair. Life on the ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. Jake's breeding program produced horses sought after throughout the territory, while Abigail started a small but productive vegetable garden and orchard. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic toddler with his mother's gentle heart and his adoptive father's quiet determination. On Thomas's second birthday, as the boy blew out the candles on his cake with more spit than air, Abigail shared the news that their family would be growing again. Jake's expression of stunned joy was something she would treasure forever, as was Thomas's confused but excited reaction to the prospect of becoming a big brother. 7 months later, Elizabeth Clara Sullivan arrived during a spring thunderstorm, her lusty cries competing with the thunder. Jake, who had paced anxiously throughout Abigail's labor, wept unashamedly when the midwife placed his daughter in his arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, bringing the baby to Abigail's side. "Just like her mother, and stubborn like her father," Abigail teased weakly, reaching out to touch the downy blonde fuzz on their daughter's head. She couldn't wait for the doctor to arrive. Jake leaned down to kiss his wife's forehead. "Green women know their own minds," he said with a smile. "Something I've come to appreciate." Thomas, now old enough to understand that the baby was his sister, approached the bed cautiously. Jake lifted him up to see, keeping a secure arm around him. "Elizabeth," Abigail said, introducing them. "This is your big brother, Thomas." The boy reached out a tentative finger to touch the baby's hand. Elizabeth's tiny fingers immediately closed around her brother's, and Thomas's face lit up with wonder. "She likes me," he said, echoing Abigail's words from years ago. Jake's eyes met Abigail's over their children's heads, a look of profound gratitude passing between them for the family they had built together from the ashes of tragedy. The years passed, bringing both joys and challenges. The Sullivan Ranch prospered, expanding to include more cattle and better breeding stock. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who inherited his biological father's love of learning and his stepfather's skill with horses. Elizabeth, true to her mother's prediction, proved to be as stubborn as she was beautiful, with a particular talent for mathematics that astonished her teachers in the Pyramid City School. Two more children joined the family: James Robert in 1884 and Sarah Grace in 1887, completing what Jake called his life's greatest achievement. The Greene-Sullivan home expanded as well, eventually including a school and training program that helped dozens of women build independent lives. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Jake surprised Abigail with a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation away from the ranch. They attended the opera, dined in fine restaurants, and walked hand in hand through bustling streets so different from their quiet desert home. On their last night in the city, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room watching ships in the harbor, Jake wrapped his arms around his wife from behind. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Abigail leaned back against his solid strength, considering the question seriously. "Only that Thomas never got to see his son grow up," she answered honestly. "Everything else, even the darkest days with the Blackwater Gang, led me to you, to our family. How could I regret that?" Jake turned her in his arms, his blue eyes as clear and honest as the day she'd met him. "When I found you that day, I thought I was saving you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But the truth is, you saved me, Abigail. I was just existing before you came into my life. You taught me how to live again, how to love." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the new lines that a decade of laughter and occasional worry had etched around his eyes. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "And we built something beautiful together." As Jake's lips met hers in a kiss as passionate as any they had shared in their youth, Abigail marveled at the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate encounter in the desert to this moment of perfect contentment. Life had tested them both, but they had emerged stronger for the trials, their love tempered by adversity and deepened by shared joy. When they returned to the ranch, they were greeted by their children's excited chatter and Clara's knowing smile as she noted their renewed glow. That evening, as the family gathered around the table Jake had built with his own hands, Abigail looked at the faces of those she loved most in the world and felt a profound sense of gratitude. From the darkest day of her life had come this: a home filled with love, a family bound by choice as much as blood, a legacy of compassion and strength that would outlive them both. Later that night, as she and Jake lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Abigail whispered the words she had first spoken to him a decade before. "They'll never touch us again," she said softly. "Not the Blackwater Gang, not the memories, not the fear. We're stronger than all of it." Jake's arms tightened around her, his heartbeat steady and reassuring against her cheek. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." And in that promise, as in all the others he had made her, Abigail found the peace and security she had once thought lost forever, a happy ending that was, in truth, just the beginning of their continuing story.